The accidental color that changed the course of art. The following is an excerpt from the article in the Huffington Post from the Zocalo Public Square by John Griswold. True blue, royal blue, ultramarine. During the Renaissance, these were all names for the most prized of all pigments. Lazurite, derived from the semi-precious mineral lapis lazuli. Mined and processed since the 6th century almost exclusively in Afghanistan, and imported to Europe through Venice, it was worth more than 5 times its weight in gold. It was used sparingly, often reserved for the richest patrons by the most prosperous artists. Look at this sumptuous still life. Painted in the mid-17th century Paris by Paul Ligeolet, which features his signature royal blue drapery. He achieved the effects with the glazes of ultramarine oil paint applied over a layer that was highlighted with white lead. When light penetrates the thin blue glaze, the white reflects it back, intensifying a deep blue hue. We often take for granted the dazzling range of colors in old oil paintings as we stroll through an art museum. Early Renaissance panels are full of jewel-like shades. Mannerists like Bronzino, for example in his An Allegory with Venus and Cupid, use shocking acid colors combinations as they stretch the limits of naturalistic representation. Grand Baroque-era artists like Caravaggio, here with his example of Calling of St. Matthew's, set vivid hues against dramatic dark shadows. In truth, these colors were hard-won, time-tested layer by layer. Techniques were required to ensure that a limited range of natural colors would maximize their visual impact. Creating a colorful oil painting was not yet the spontaneous act we envision, with the likes of Monet performing as he captured fleeting light and color effects. That spontaneity required 2 remarkable advancements: a scientific understanding of the laws of light and color, and a new palette of colors that would be used to exploit these laws. As luck would have it, both happened around the year 1704. Sir Isaac Newton published his revolutionary text, Optiques, and a German chemist discovered a vivid, new blue pigment with amazing properties. That blue was an accident. In 1704, a chemist and color maker named Heinrich Diesbach was rushing to manufacture a batch of Florentine lake, a red pigment derived from boiled cochineal insect, alum, iron sulfate, and potash. Lacking his last ingredient, he borrowed some from an alchemist, Joachim Conrad Dippel, not knowing it had been contaminated with so-called animal oil, a foul concoction of blood and other animal-derived ingredients that Dippel sold as a cure-all. Diesbach returned in the morning to discover a deep blue substance, thanks to the presence of iron cyanide contaminant. The 2 men quickly realized the commercial potential of this new pigment and independently began producing batches of it to sell to painters at the Prussian court. By 1710, the first samples of Prussian blue pigment arrived in Paris, where Anton Watteau is known to have shared it with his fellow painters. Jean-Honoré Fragonard and François Bouchard both were early and enthusiastic adopters of the new blue for their compositions. This Fête Champêtre, a scene of a garden party by Bonaventure de Bar, is an intimate of Debaucher's circle, was painted in 1728. A glimpse under the microscope reveals rough, irregular particles typical of early Prussian blue, scattered in a thin glaze over the sky and clothing. Although Prussian blue lacked the clear, true blue hue of lazurite, Prussian blue had unique properties that allowed painters to work more spontaneously. Only a small amount was required to impart a strong tint to other colors, including white. Painters could now mix a much wider spectrum of colors on their palette. In Optiques, Newton wrote about his findings about light and color. For example, He had separated a beam of sunlight into component colors with a prism. Word spread of Newton's work, thanks highly to vocal supporters like Voltaire and vehement opponents like Goethe. Artists began to experiment with color harmonies to create illusions of depth and new ways. Color wheels and other diagrammatic representation of color theory revealed sophisticated relationships, and artists soon realized that colors diametrically opposed on the color wheel, known as complementary colors, had a special harmonic relationship. Placing one next to another or partially covering up one with the other results in optical effects simulating three-dimensional depth. One color tends to advance or pop, as we sometimes say now. Thanks to the discovery of Prussian blue, painters had for the first time a palette of oil paints that could let them reproduce the full color wheel and thereby experiment spontaneously on the canvas to achieve marvelous optical effects. In France, these new possibilities came to fruition in Rococo painting. With its playful subject matter, delicacy of color, and exuberant brushwork, this art movement became known in the early 18th century as peinture moderne. Deceptively simple, these paintings reveal a mastery of the new scientific principles of color theory. Color harmonies were everywhere, in the deepest shadows and the most brilliant sunlight. Black was all but banished. Practices popularly credited to the French Impressionists have their origins more than a century earlier, as the Rococo artists took advantage of the expanded palette. For example, take a painting like Jupiter and Semele by Deschaux de Courville. His masterful brushwork, characterized by deftly placing and blending strokes of varying colors and hues directly into each other, juxtaposes complementary colors in careful orchestrated variations. As a result, his figures project forward from the Prussian greens and blues of the forest backdrop. Prussian blue was made in the laboratory of an alchemist at the right time to resonate with the dissemination of a grand scientific revelation and to catalyze a whole new direction in human expression. Serendipity happens, and sometimes the result is revolution.